nervous about the title of this sermon? Well, no worries, because I asked Berta this morning how long Pastor Janelle usually preaches, and she says, the reason you start at 10 a.m. is so that you have 2 hours until noon, and that I had probably at least an hour. Right? Just kidding, she did not say that. She said, though, that you were anxious to get to happy hour, which I usually am too. So there's something we have in common. I'm really grateful for the welcome this morning and for Berta helping me get situated here. Like Berta said, my name is Neil Sharp, and I am a pastor here in our conference in the Seattle district, partnered with Valley and Mountain. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about how I got here. So originally I'm from North Carolina, and I was appointed to the Capitol Hill neighborhood here in Seattle to come and do a new church start. So I spent a few months trying to get to know the neighborhood in Capitol Hill, and the reason I was appointed there was because I formerly was an opera singer, and so they wanted me to come and start a community with creative types of people, with artists. And I got to Capitol Hill, and I started looking for the creative types and for cheap space, and I found not much of either. As if you've been here for a while, longer than I have, just about 2 years, you know that Capitol Hill is no longer cheap, which apparently it used to be cheap, and that's just not the case any longer. And you also know that no longer can artists afford to be in Capitol Hill because it's just blown up like the rest of the city with tech folk that can afford the $2,200 a month rent for a 500 square foot apartment like we found when we were looking, which has probably gone up now in 2 years. So quickly we decided Capitol Hill's probably not the place for this work to happen. And so we started looking maybe in Georgetown and where some of the artists were gathering, but quickly we found out that space was at a premium in this city, as you probably know. We just couldn't afford to be much of anywhere. And Rich Lang, our district superintendent here, said, I want you to meet Hal Perry. Do you know Hal Perry? If I'm not mistaken, Hal's dad started this church. Is that right? So Perry Hall is Hal's dad. Hal is also a Methodist pastor who is retired, but is quarter time with Ravenna United Methodist Church. And so Rich took me to meet Hal, and we had this incredible connection from day one. We sat down together, and I really had no idea what to expect. But Hal is, I think he's 82 years old now, and was just with it. I mean, he got the vision of what I wanted to do more than I get it on many levels. And he just started telling me all of these stories, and I was like, oh my gosh, Hal, you're doing what I want to do, but you did it like 50 years ago. So Hal started in Capitol Hill, was his first appointment here at Capitol Hill United Methodist Church, which is no longer there. Well, the building is there, but the congregation is no longer there. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. Hal and I have this kind of same path, and he did work there, working with youth that were addicted and living on the streets and all sorts of stuff like that. Anyway, a long story short, Ravenna United Methodist Church was actually planted by Capitol Hill United Methodist Church. And it's funny that Hal started there and ended up here in Ravenna, and I started there and now ended up in Ravenna. And the thing that happened was Hal said, we've dwindled down to about 10 people, and those 10 folks are made up of a group of people that were about 5 Methodists and about 5, what do they call themselves? ECC, a Catholic church, ecumenical Catholic church. And they decided to join forces together because they had dwindled to such a small number. Because of waning physical and mental capacity, they decided we can't really take care of this building any longer, but we want to give it to you. And that happened because I walked through the building, and the building is littered with these little carols that are these 3-walled carols that used to be Sunday school rooms. And to me, those carols were made perfectly for art studios. And I looked at those and I thought, wow, this is an amazing thing. This church that was built in 1922, they knew that in 2017 and 2018 I was going to be here and I would need art studios. Isn't that crazy? That they would have such foresight to do that? Well, of course, that's not really what happened. But they built 3-walled Sunday school rooms, which, at one point it's said that there were 250 kids in this building. And it's a decently sized building, but 250 kids with no fourth wall is a mighty task to control the volume, we'll say. And so we have some work to do there. We see these art studios that have formerly been Sunday school rooms that have housed people that don't have homes through Mary's Place. And yet, all of these things were not initially what they were intended to be. They were intended to be Sunday school rooms. So, I have a question for you. What's your favorite part of spring? Buds?
Taking naps outside.
What was that one?
Taking naps outside.
Taking naps outside?
Sunny weather.
And the sunny weather, absolutely. What else? Favorite part of spring?
Tulips.
Tulips. Wow, look at that. 2 tulips at the same time. Why do the winters here feel so long? That's a genuine question just for me. I came from North Carolina, and you know, the winters there, they can be annoying, but it doesn't get dark at 4 o'clock. So what is it about this place that makes the winters feel so long? Is it the anticipation of spring? Is it the grieving of the beautiful summer that came before? One of the things that I think is really cool about spring is that all of it comes from the planting of seeds. In our prayer a little earlier, we prayed about this idea of work that's happening underground. So what happens when you plant a seed? Any biologists in here? Or botanists or people that know things about the earth?
It germinates.
It germinates, yeah. Well, this is great because I can make up all sorts of stuff since nobody in here really knows about seeds. So yeah, it germinates, right? A seed germinates, and then what happens? It sprouts, and then what? It grows, yeah, but what happens before it goes out of the ground? It has to grow what?
Roots.
It grows down, right? It grows roots, yeah. There's this incredible work that happens underneath the ground that we don't realize what's taking place. Well, where do seeds come from? From the plant before, right? Sometimes the plant in its dying process, and sometimes it doesn't die, but oftentimes it's a dying process, lets go of these seeds, right? For hope for spring, for hope that there will be a new life that comes forth. Or it's not even a hope. It's the knowledge that this is what happens. Thousands and thousands of millennia have gone by, and the plants have realized that it's in letting go in a dying process that something beautiful and new happens. This resurrection, we might call it. So what's the purpose of death? We talk about the purpose of life. We wrestle with that a lot, right? What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? But not often do we wrestle with the question, what is the purpose of death? Have any ideas what the purpose of death is?
Rest.
Make room for renewal.
To make room for renewal? There was one more over here. To make space? Yeah?
No more taxes.
What was it?
No more
No more
taxes.
taxes. Yeah. Well, what a city for that. We got lots of those, don't we? Yeah. What is the purpose of death? I don't know either. But I think, you have one? Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know what the purpose of death is either, but I think that's part of what Jeremiah was wrestling with in this story that we listened to. Oftentimes, I think when we listen to the Hebrew Bible stories or the Old Testament stories, it just sounds so monotonous, right? It sounds boring. It's these weird details that don't seem to really make any sense. It doesn't have a real, gospel message feel that's like, yes, we want to do that because it's this long story about somebody's son who did this stuff that seems irrelevant to us. But what I like about this story is it starts off, the beginning of Jeremiah starts off with God speaking to Jeremiah, and he says, look, I've placed my words in you. You will know what to say now, for you will be my voice. This very day I appointed you to speak with my authority over nations and kingdoms. Your word, my word, will have the power to uproot and stamp out. It will destroy and upend. Does that sound like what you expect God to hear or God to say through God's word? My word is going to stamp out and it's going to destroy. That's not quite the God that I think about. But then he goes on and says, and your word, my word, will rebuild and plant anew. God is calling Jeremiah to be a part of the dying process, but also the new life process. I don't know how much you know about Jeremiah, but Jeremiah did not want his job. He hated it. Jeremiah was a teenager when he got the call from God to be a prophet, and it was clear where Judah was going. It was going down. I don't know if you know anything else that seems to be going down in your life, but if it is going down, it's not often that we want to join in that process, right? We don't often say, let's look for something that is failing and dying and dwindling, and that's what I want to be a part of. That's not our intuition, right? We look for things that we want, that are doing well, that we can grow together, that we can all have life together with. But this is not what Jeremiah was called to, and he did not like it. He was quite disturbed by what was happening, and it was an awful, awful existence that Jeremiah had. He watched war rip apart his family, kill his loved ones, destroy his town. He even tried to run away and was arrested for being a traitor. And that's how he ended up with King Zedekiah, who we talked about or heard about through this story. And King Zedekiah did not like the message that Jeremiah had, because Jeremiah's message was, yes, God said that we are going to be taken over by Babylon. We're going to be stamped out. Well, what kind of king wants to hear that news from a prophet, much less some young punk teenager who's not quite a teenager anymore, but someone who just started out as a teenager saying, yep, King Zedekiah, I'm here to tell you, it's all going away. We're getting stamped out. So why did Jeremiah stick it out? Well, perhaps it's because he saw the potential for new life. He knew that in dying, there could be made room for new life. So we heard this kind of detailed story about Hanamel and all of these weird names that sound weird to us, about this buying of the field. So it says this, so I bought the field in Anathoth from Hanamel, my cousin, for 7 ounces of silver. This is a detail here that we might often miss. I signed and sealed the deed in front of witnesses. So there's another detail. After weighing out the silver on the scales. Well, why was he being so careful with the silver and weighing it out if it was all going to be taken by Babylon anyway? I paid Hanamel two copies of the deed were made. I took the sealed copy along with the terms and conditions of the purchase, and the unsealed copy, handed them to my trusted friend and confidant Baruch, son of Neriah and grandson of Messiah, and I did all of this in the presence of my cousin Hanamel, the witnesses who had signed the deed, and all of the people in Judea who were that day in the court of the guard. In the presence of all those people, I directed Baruch, the eternal commander of heavenly armies and the God of Israel says, take both the sealed deed and the unsealed deed and place them in a clay jar to preserve them. I want this deed of sale to last for a long time. So a little bit of background on what's happening here. So Hanamel had kind of used his field, this field that Jeremiah is buying, as collateral for a debt. You know, often we have to we will say, you know, I'll put up my house as collateral on this loan. So that's what Hanamel had done. And in Levitical law, it said that if your family member loans out their field for a debt, then it's your responsibility to buy it, to make sure that it stays safe, that it's not foreclosed on and taken. And so that's what's happening here. Jeremiah took very much care to buy back this field and to take the deed and to bury it in the ground so that it would be protected for a long time. Well, here's the weird thing about that. If you knew that some awful thing was going to happen and that we were going to get wiped out of Seattle, would you be worried about buying property and burying the deed to make sure that it lasts a long time? I wouldn't be. I'd be worried about getting all the things that I could gather, all the people I could gather, and getting out of here, right? We don't want to stick around for this death process, for this painful thing where we're going to be taken over. Babylon is going to come in. Our home, our house, our community as we know it is no longer going to be the same. Yet, Jeremiah took all of this incredible care and detail in buying this field. For what end? A promise. A promise that one day, the day will come when my people will buy houses and vineyards and fields again in this land. There's a promise there, but there's not a time frame on this, right? Jeremiah is not going to be around for this renewal, for this regathering. Yet he does the hard work that is required for this to take place. So what's our invitation here? Are we invited to be exiled? Are we invited to die? Who are we in this story? Are we the Israelites? Are we the ones being exiled? Or are we the ones that are doing the exiling? Are we more like Babylon, coming into a place and taking over and kicking out? Oftentimes down at Valley Mountain, at the beginning of our service, we acknowledge that we're standing on Duwamish land. And though we did not necessarily participate in the kicking out of the Duwamish people, I think it's important that we acknowledge the fact that we have displaced people. And in many ways, we're more like the Babylonians here. We are the people who have exiled the people who were here first. So, what is our responsibility again? What's our invitation here? If we're the Babylonians, what are we to do? How can we bring about this new life? How can we restore some semblance of justice? What about the thousands of people that are sleeping on the streets at night? What about the people who are being displaced because the houses that they grew up in and lived in are no longer affordable to them, even though they're paid off? The property taxes are so expensive. I have a friend who grew up here in Capitol Hill, and to live in his house is $18,000 a year just in property taxes. So he has to rent it out to other people just to pay the property taxes. I think that's what, $1,500 a month just in property taxes. So what are we to do if we're the Babylonians? What if we're the Israelites? What's our invitation if we're the Israelites? Are we to just pack up shop and say, well, we gave it a good go? Are we to just hope that things work out? Do we take an active role in restoring life? What's the purpose of allowing our ideas and our desires and our way to die? What is that purpose of death? One of the ways that I've seen this really come to life for me in the past year is through this relationship with Ravenna. Though it's not been easy for them, and they say, I have a lot of memories in this place. I remember this life-changing moment that happened at this altar, or a wedding that happened here with a family, or this meeting, or this important thing, or this transformative community event that happened in this room. It's a hard thing to accept that dying and death process. But it doesn't mean that it's dying and they are dying. It means that they are, I like whoever said it, was making room for new life to come about. They're making room for this new thing to sprout. And I don't know that what we're doing will work. I hope it will. But I think that this new life that we hope for, this springtime, is coming. There's a hope in spring, right? There's a hope in the buds and the flowers and the tulips. And I think we have to always contemplate, what is our invitation here? What is our invitation to die to ourselves so that we might have life more abundantly? Now, please don't hear me saying that that's where you are, that you need to die and leave your building. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is I'm inviting you to ponder in your own personal lives, what is it that you need to let go of? What is it that you're holding so tightly to that you're missing out on this life abundant? I think it's really cool, the rummage sale that you're doing. The rummage sale, I think, is a great picture of that. There's some things that are in my house that are cluttering. Yesterday we spent almost the entire day cleaning our house, and it's still not clean. But we have a lot of work to do to let go of some of this stuff that's cluttering our lives. Sometimes that's physical and material. Sometimes it's emotional and spiritual. Maybe it's an idea of God that you carry with you, that you're clinging so tightly to. I know for me, I grew up Southern Baptist. And Southern Baptist, if you're not familiar with it, is quite fundamental, and I will leave it at that. It's quite fundamental. And a lot of times, those things that were taught to me when I was a young child are deeply rooted in there. And so a lot of the prejudices that were placed on me being a Southern Baptist can kind of come up, and I don't even realize it. And I go, oh, what is that thing that's going on in my mind? I don't believe that. Yet it still comes up. There's some uprooting that needs to happen. The weeds in there are thick, and I got to keep pulling them out so that there's room for this new, beautiful tulip to spring forth. So what is that invitation that you have for dying? I think oftentimes we think we've got to hold on to what we have, because if we don't, then our investments will be for naught. But if we can let go, if we release things, a plant did not release its seed, then the return on investment of energy that it put into creating these seeds is for nothing, right? The seeds aren't dropped. They're not able to germinate, to spring forth, and to bring new life. Are you familiar with the word prolepsis? Ever heard of that word? Prolepsis. It's one of my favorite words. It basically means that the potential that something holds. So the prolepsis of a seed is whatever plant that let it go. The potential of that seed. So if an acorn is dropped, the potential of that acorn is an oak tree, right? There is potential for a gigantic, mighty oak in this one tiny acorn. Its prolepsis is wrapped up in this tiny, small package that only comes through it letting go. So the return on investment of dying, of letting go, is something else that is mighty and strong. Who knows what that oak tree will turn into be? Maybe it will be one of these beams that holds up one of these beautiful buildings. Maybe it will be a pew that you're sitting in. Maybe it will be a table that you sit with your family at. The potential for that is held in an oak tree. What are those small things that we're holding on to, that we're not willing to let go because we're afraid? So my hope is that the Ravenna Laboratory, Ravenna United Methodist Church, will not just be a place for the people that live in Ravenna, but that it will be a place that's occupied by people of color, that it will be occupied by marginalized people. Many of you probably know about the redlining that happened in Seattle many years ago, but then is still kind of historically played out. When we bought our house in West Seattle, my wife Laura and I, we had to sign something that said, we realized that the contract that used to be on this land, that a person of color could not buy this land, is no longer valid. And it blew my mind that such a thing existed, especially in the Pacific Northwest. That a person of color couldn't buy land here. And then I learned that there used to be this rule that, I think it was the Mountain Lake Cut, that people of color were not allowed north of that. Actually, I think it was the Central District, and then moved to the Cut. And so if you didn't know that, that's historically why the north end where we are is so white. it's hard for me to stomach that used to be in this beautiful, beautiful city. A place where we celebrate inclusion, of equality. We are working towards equality anyway. We hope that will come. So my hope is that we can create space for people who have historically not been allowed to be here to be here. To find space not just to exist, but to find space that they can lead us through teaching us art. They can lead us through teaching us spiritual practices. They can lead us through teaching us their stories, that we might let our stories and our desires and our own willingness and our own will to move out of the way, so that someone else who's not been able to be here, to have their seeds dropped on this fertile soil, that their roots might grow, that they might germinate, that they might spring forth in a new and beautiful way. I want to close with this idea that one of these incredible people of color shared, who passed away just yesterday. Dr. James Cone is an African-American man who taught at Union Theological Seminary, who was an African Methodist Episcopal ordained person who is, they're kind of a sibling to our United Methodist way. And he said many, many brilliant things, but this one really stands out to me. It says, the Christian community, therefore, is that community that freely becomes oppressed, because they know that Jesus himself has defined humanity's liberation in the context of what happens to the little ones, the seeds, the acorns, the people that are pushed on the margins. Christians join the cause of the oppressed in the fight for justice, not because of some philosophical principle of the good, or because of a religious feeling of sympathy for people in prison. Sympathy does not change the structures of injustice. The authentic identity of Christians with the poor is found in the claim which the Jesus encounter lays upon their own lifestyle. Let me read that sentence again, because that's a heavy one. The authentic identity of Christians with the poor is found in the claim which the Jesus encounter lays upon their own lifestyle, a claim that connects the word Christian with the liberation of the poor. Christians fight not for humanity in general, but for themselves and their love for concrete human beings. I think that, to me, is one of the things that I need to continue to work on letting die within me. This idea of humanity in general. There are so many people that are in our community, that are outside our doors, that are hurting, that are concrete humans. And that part is really hard to deal with. And so often I try to think, well, I'm giving money to my church and we're trying to do this good work. And hopefully that in turn will create a change. But that's not really the case, right? We throw money at a lot of things. We throw resources at a lot of things. But there are concrete humans that are in front of us, human beings that we can engage with if we just will let a little piece of ourselves die. Maybe it's the uncomfortableness of saying hello. Let's practice that. Can you say hello?
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more energetically.
Hello.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing when we say hello, when we look up and see someone in their eyes. We don't see past them, but we see into them. We see that they are a human being, and that we can do something to recognize the humanity in them. Maybe it's just saying hello. Maybe it's saying, what do you need? What can I do for you? I think that's one of the things that's hard in Seattle. The Seattle freeze is a little bit of a real thing, right? That we don't like to look at people. But if we can look up and say hello, then a little piece of us dies. A little piece of us that is scared to see the humanity in someone else. And at the same time that that dying process is happening, something else is being rooted and springing forth in us. And that's our own humanity. That's that Christianity that Dr. Cohen's talking about here, that we're fighting for ourselves and for the concrete humans around us. So I leave you with this question. What is it that we as people